unifying around the protection of due process for all citizens instead of the Department of Injustice being able to persecute their political opponents. If we're talking about unifying around making sure all Americans can live out the constitutional protections of the Second Amendment and protecting their families, those are the types of things absolutely we should unify around. But if anybody thinks that this whole nation is ever going to agree 100% on anything, they've never read history. And if anybody thinks the Democrats are going to just, sing kumbaya with Donald Trump, forget it. That's never happened. The winning side has to go in and press their advantage. And MSNBC yahoos went to visit with President Trump. Well, hey, he was willing to talk to them, so he's trying to unify. As I said last week, even Donald Trump, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but more magnanimous than I would be. I wouldn't even talk to those turkeys after they called me a Nazi. So I think he is trying to unify the nation, and he will be able to unify the middle and the right, but I don't see the leftist gathering with Donald Trump to make this nation better.
I agree. Mark Meckler, a lot of times the liberal side loves to throw the word unity and unify around. What they really mean is we want you to compromise on what you ran on that got you into office so that it'll help us later. Do you see it that same way, or what is it you're seeing coming forward?
Yeah, look, I think that's usually what you see from the left, and I think you continue to see that from what I would describe as the elitist left. But what we're seeing is regular people who were of the left are unifying around Donald Trump and his ideas. When you look at folks like Joe Rogan, I would say he came from the left. When you look at Elon Musk, he came from the left. And obviously, there are a lot of people who came, maybe were center left and moved over Trump's way. He is in the position of being the great unifier.
And Pastor Hank, I'll go to you on this. When we see this, I think the American people have done exactly that. They've unified around President Trump. All swing states. Remember, we played the video. Oh, he'll never get all the swing states. Well, that happened. What is it you see from your perspective?
Well, I think, again, the American people are unifying about, America first. And I do agree with what Rick had mentioned about, the hard left. You never are going to be able to work together with them. They have gone totally a different direction, and they're doing it on purpose. And unless you compromise and come down to their level, there's no deals. So they're going to continue to point the finger at President Trump and say he's not the unifier. Here's what we do need to unify about. I think when it comes to humanitarian, compassionate issues that deal with the people, especially when you have hurricanes, things like that, and just in general, we the American people, there needs to be a unity when it comes to those kind of things. But when it comes to reform, Gene, I think you got to look at history, both from the religious side, but also in the governmental side. Reformers, they always stood alone at first, and they rallied the multitudes later. And I think that's what President Trump has to do, and his cabinet is reform. And don't worry about whether the left comes along. And lastly, you can't make deals with the donkeys, the rhinos, or even the snakes of D.C.
That's true. Let me show you.
Attack the left and not attack everybody. Let them all talk their but unite. Now it's time to unite everybody.
There are a lot of skeptics out there who don't think President Trump is going to be about unity. What do you say to Joe Rogan's point?
I think what Joe Rogan is saying is absolutely correct. And Donald Trump's going to be focused on those things. Look at the announcements he's already made. One of the key things is he wants to support a constitutional amendment to bring congressional term limits. That is something that overwhelmingly the American people have supported for a very long time. Look at what's happening already across the globe. Qatar wants Hamas out of Doha. You have the Chinese are signaling they want peaceful relations. You have the Russians and the Ukrainians now saying they're open to talking. The European Union wants to buy liquid natural gas from the United States. This caravan that was building below our southern border is now starting to break up because they know Donald Trump's going to be the next president of the United States, and we are not going to tolerate more illegal immigration. Those are the things that unite the American people. If you have talking heads on the left who still want to go down the line of their conspiracy theories, let them. Donald Trump's going to be focused on the American people.
With me now, Joshua Phillips, senior investigative reporter at Epic Times and the host of Crossroads. Joshua, good to have you back. It's been a while. Good to have you back on Flashpoint.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So you hear what Byron Donalds is, and you heard the rest of the panel say what they're saying about unity. What say you?
My personal take is this. Look at Columbia University, right? They were talking about freedom of speech until they had the power to dictate others' speech, and then they started calling for censorship. Look, for example, at the people calling for tolerance. They want tolerance until they're in a position where they can create intolerance. And then what do they demand? They demand that everybody else gets punished for speech they don't like. I do hope that Trump can unify the average person, but I do think you need to be careful of the extremes. And what you find oftentimes with communists or people who are on the very extreme spectrum is when you're dealing with what's called the communist dialectic, they will push and they'll push and they'll push until you push back. And then they'll put their arms up and say, hey, peace and unity, let's find a middle ground here. You back off. And they start pushing again. And it's through this that the middle just moves like this, right? The middle changes. And so if you go back 15 years, the stuff Trump's pushing for right now would have been considered moderate. Tough on crime, close the border. Obama was the deporter in chief. You know what I mean? These policies 15 years ago would have been considered moderate in many cases. And so I think that there is a definition of, what is the middle at this point.
Yeah, it's a good, Rick, Joshua brings up a good point. It would have been. In fact, a lot of these would have been heralded by the Democrats themselves.
Josh always brings up good points, man. I love that guy, and he does a great job on Epic Times. Josh, good to see you, man. Yeah, that's just it. Where is the Overton window at this point? Have they moved this thing so far left that normal, constitutional, biblical is now seen as an extreme rather than what made the country great in the first place? So there are going to be a lot of people very unhappy with the moves that Trump is making. But I do think, to what Mark said earlier and to what the congressman from Florida was saying, listen, the election, when you look at the polling, whether it's term limits, which is one of the things that Mark's working on with Convention of States, or it's making sure that we don't have crazy illegal aliens that are part of Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes or raping our daughters in the out there on the streets like what happened in Georgia. I mean, those are things the American people can absolutely unite around, and those are the things that Donald Trump articulated all through the campaign. So to Joe Rogan's point, absolutely, let the other side have their say. We're all for civil discourse, but then,
well, believe it or not, the MSM, the mainstream media, is really concerned about the undoing of the Biden legacy. I got to tell you, I would think they would be thrilled with the undoing of the Biden legacy. Yet MSNBC says there's a concern. Watch.
Joe Biden will hand over the reins of power to Donald Trump and a Republican-controlled Congress, which leaves the question, how much of his legacy is going to survive this new red trifecta that's coming in January? And to that end, we broke this down into 4 different baskets, ranging from elements of the Biden legacy that are most at risk under Trump and Republicans and those that are safest. Let's start with executive actions. There's a lot that Joe Biden did with a stroke of a pen that Donald Trump can undo with a stroke of a pen. Immigration orders included. Trump campaigned heavily on toughening immigration laws. We should expect the Biden orders to be replaced or superseded. LGBTQ rights, especially transgender rights, Trump campaigned heavily against that as well. The executive orders that Biden did on this front should be likely in danger. Student loan forgiveness, another Trump target on the campaign trail. Those programs are up in the air when Donald Trump takes power. And then something like abortion travel across state lines, which Joe Biden sought to protect. Donald Trump has said he doesn't see a federal role for protecting abortion rights. Could that be at risk? And then there's the bipartisan bills that passed in the bipartisan era that are largely safe. CHIPS and Science Act, infrastructure law, safer communities, Respect for Marriage Act can't be undone because there's a filibuster. Finally, Anna, the judges. Joe Biden has 215 judges. That number is going to grow in the lame duck. There's nothing Donald Trump and Republicans will be able to do about them. They will serve for life.
We'll see what happens. The judges is a big mystery coming up. We'll see what really happens to that. But before the clip there, Pastor Hank, you had a comment. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just laughing at it. I mean, do you really want to call it a Biden legacy? I mean, it's a legacy that needs to have a big old stamp over it that says canceled. And the legacy, it's interesting, it has LEG, leg. All he talked about was his legs in the swimming pool with little kids. So I think it needs to be canceled. But here's the other thing. We got to go back to something with unity. They're going to continue to say they want unity. Really what they want is they want compromise. They want conformity. The Bible talks about the unity of the faith. If they're not willing to make things better, they're not wanting to unify. And I say better by way of the next thing, unity of the Spirit, the Bible talks about, moral issues. And then there's a unity of the brethren, which we the people, the majority of us, the red states, not the little blue dot cities, that really want true moral change and sanity brought back to our nation. Until they're willing to talk about that and things that don't offend God, then I think there's a discussion.
Well, I think you're right. And, Mark, I'll go to you on this. we'll talk about the judges in a minute, but, seeing just exactly the legacy, I mean, there are some things that are going to change, absolutely. But again, we're talking about the fact that America has spoken in a very convincing way, and to try and slip in this, we're undoing something or trying to not, as if you're doing something negative or wrong, really is misleading to the American people. They've already spoken in an overwhelming way. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the good news is that the American people aren't being misled any longer. The media is trying, but they're largely unsuccessful.
To resign and step down. Of course, it didn't happen. But how important is it as we look forward to the next 4 years with these justices in their places?
Yeah, I think this is really important and something that most people don't pay attention to. During any presidency, there are a lot of federal judgeships that get filled. There are a lot of unfilled federal judgeships, and Obama left a bunch. Trump took advantage of that. I think he appointed more federal judges than any president in modern history, maybe any president in history completely. And now Biden is following suit, and I don't think they're going to leave any of those unfilled if they can do it. But you've got Mitch McConnell in the Senate, and I don't think he's just going to go along quietly. He is the best parliamentarian the Senate's ever seen. He knows the rules. He might throw a monkey wrench into some of this stuff, and I hope that he does.
What do you think, Rick? You think we're going to see that monkey wrench be thrown?
I'm just dreaming here. Okay, I'm going to throw this out there. I'm just dreaming. I would love to see some Mr. Smith goes to Washington type filibusters. When's the last time you saw one of those, right? And then what if Ted Cruz did it for 2 days, as long as he can keep him going to the bathroom or whatever. And then Josh Hawley, and then Mike Lee, and they just do it day after day after day. I know they're not going to do it, but wouldn't that be fun? I mean, that would be we'd learn a lot. They could read Green Eggs and Ham and all that good stuff, the way we do filibusters in Texas. So it's not going to happen, but we can dream.
Joshua Phillip, please tell me something, educate us somewhere.
Yeah. I actually do think you will see a lot of pushback from Republicans. And, as you mentioned, it can be a filibuster. Right? It actually can be. You don't need all could. I think you could see it delayed. And, and this does actually tie into the call for unity thing, because while you do have the Democrats now calling for unity and talking about this, a lot of Republicans remember that just a couple months ago, there was talks about putting Trump and his family in prison, and Trump in prison for probably the rest of his life. They remember that. And they remember, of course, some of the legal attacks and threats and the name calling and everything else that really just suddenly came to an end as soon as the other side lost power and locked it with everything they have.
All right, let me show you guys this. This is President Trump. We talked about the Department of Education before on previous shows and the commitment to shut it down. Let's hear it from the man himself, President Trump.
And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse. We're going to end education coming out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up, all those buildings all over the place, and you have people that in many cases hate our children. We're going to send it all back to the states.
All right, so sending it back to the states, let's go back to you, Mark, and all that. I think most American families that we talk to seem to be thrilled with this concept.
Yeah, I think this is incredible. This is something that I've been fighting for literally for the last 11 years, is to shut down the Department of Education, return all the authority to the states. There's a little bit of detail in there I'm interested in, because there's a lot of money that comes from the states that goes to the federal government that gets spent on education. I don't want to see the states get deprived of that. I'm hoping that the federal government just block grants that back to the states so the states don't see cuts in education funding. But let's get it all back in the states. Let's get it all back in the hands of the parents, local school boards. I guarantee you we will see an education renaissance in the United States of America.
Yeah, we will. Rick, your thoughts?
Yeah, man, I ran on this in 1998, the first time I ran for office. So love seeing this happen, absolutely. And Mark's right. There's a really important detail right there. The whole concept of block grant. We had Steve Deace and Daniel Horowitz out at the campus this last weekend, and Steve Deace talked about this, and I think it's brilliant. He said we should take that idea that Donald Trump just said about the Department of Education. We need to do that with all the other unconstitutional agencies. Instead of doing what I've been wanting to do, which is just zero them out, get rid of them completely, a more palpable, easier way to get it done is to say, okay, we'll keep doing those things at the state level. The feds are going to block grant all that money. So I'm talking Department of Education, Energy, Agriculture, go through all these unconstitutional agencies and send the money back to the states. That'd be step one. And then eventually stop having the federal government, basically divert that money and just stop sending it to them in the first place. But initially say, don't worry, we're going to keep doing all these things that all these people seem to think they want the government to do, but we're going to do it in a better way at the state level. That at least is taking the step in the right direction.
Well, you talk about shuttering other agencies. Let me show you this clip with Vivek Ramaswamy. I like saying Ramaswamy almost as much as Amanchukwu, but anyway, listen to what about closing entire agencies. Let's hear what he had to say. Watch.
Are you expecting to close down entire agencies like President Trump has talked about the Department of Education, for example? Are you going to be closing down departments?
We expect mass reductions. We expect certain agencies to be deleted outright. We expect mass reductions in force in areas of the federal government that are bloated. We expect massive cuts among federal contractors and others who are overbilling the federal government. So, yes, we expect all of the above. And I think people will be surprised by, how quickly we're able to move with some of those changes, given the legal backdrop the Supreme Court has given us.
All right, so making a lot of changes there, Joshua. Let me get your comment there. This might cause a lot of concern across America, especially if you were employed by a lot of these agencies. Give us your thoughts.
Well, it's interesting because I think this actually contradicts one of the big narratives against Trump, which is he wants to be a dictator. If Trump wanted to be a dictator, then he would be interested in maintaining all the power in Washington because that would be his power. He would not want to send it back to the states. He would want to create, maybe the new Common Core education using the Department of Education and create an education system that would be dictated for use in every state. Instead, he's actually relinquishing some of this power and sending it back to the states and back to the American people. Actually, what he's representing, I think, is more of a deregulation movement, and the idea that maybe the government will be more effective and more efficient if you cut some of the fat off it. You are going to have a lot of people unhappy about that. I do wonder what's going to happen with public officials who might have gotten pensions, and especially with the unions. That's going to be interesting to watch, but we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, we'll definitely see how it turns out. All right, let me go to this last piece of shuttering agencies and changing, hopefully on day one. The two in the last year, the two times we met with President Trump, asked him what will you do about the Johnson Amendment? And I'll give this to you, Mark, to start, because I know you've been working on this as well. But the Johnson Amendment has held at bay. Pastors have hit behind that Johnson Amendment, even when we've tried to encourage them to go out in front of it and put it to the test. We here at Flashpoint, we've been censored, like you can't talk, be careful, don't say too much, you got to be careful. What is it that do we really want another executive order, Mark, that just, and if the next guy gets in and undoes it again? Seems to me we want something a little stronger than that.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of the executive order. Because this is something that's throttled pastors and churches and nonprofits for a long time. So people understand what it is. Organizations called 501c3s. These are nonprofit charitable organizations, and most churches are 501c3s. They're not allowed to speak politically. It is a restraint on their First Amendment rights if they are to continue as 501c3 entities. And I think that's totally unconstitutional. And the best way to deal with that, in my opinion, and we're involved in this right now, is to litigate against the Johnson Amendment as the unconstitutional infringement as it is. I want that to make it all the way up to the Supreme Court. I want them to declare that unconstitutional, because if we do it by executive order, what happens is Donald Trump does it, signs it. Now pastors are free to talk until the next administration, the next Democrat administration. So I want that gone forever. You do that by getting a ruling from the Supreme Court or by having a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, I agree. Your thoughts, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has been the paper tiger for years. It's not, I mean, it's exactly what Mark said. It's a violation of your First Amendment rights. It's a violation of all 5 of your First Amendment rights. Think about a pastor standing up in the pulpit, I don't care, Sunday morning, Wednesday night, whenever. They have a freedom of religion to say what they believe about whatever they want to speak to. They shouldn't be limited in any way, shape, or form. They have freedom of speech to do the same thing. They are the press, just like the Black Robed Regiment from the founding era. They would be the ones to get up and share with the community what was going on. You're having the freedom of assembly right there at that church, and sometimes your sermon is a petition for a redress of grievances. So the idea that we would in any way muzzle our pastors absolutely is the opposite of what America is all about. And this has been going on since 1954. It has got to stop, and we've got to restore all of those freedoms for our pastors across the country. And as Mark said, for all other nonprofits as well. There is no reason that because you're a nonprofit, you should in any way be limited in your constitutional rights. So I'm so thankful Mark is litigating this. We've tried to get the IRS to sue pastors. We've had pastors endorse candidates from the pulpit and send the sermon to the IRS, say, please come and get me. They've never done it. Why? Because it is a paper tiger. They know they're going to lose, and Mark's taking an aggressive approach. We're finally going to get this thing overturned, Lord willing.
Yeah, and unfortunately, though, there's a lot that still hide behind that and don't want to.
Yeah.
And I think it's, well, doesn't matter what I think. You all know what I think. All right, Josh, Philip, I get your take on it.
Yeah, well, I think what the Johnson Amendment has done is basically removed religion from secular society. It's made it so that people who hold religious viewpoints, at least from the pulpit, as we've been mentioning, they can't actually engage in the political system. And I think this is a deep misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the idea of separation of church and state, because you do see the state trying to regulate the churches, but they don't want the church to get involved in the state. And when you separate church from state in that regard, what you end up doing is separating values from political discussion. And I think that's really unhealthy for our society.
Yeah, I believe you're absolutely right. Pastor Hank, you're one of the few that did not shy away. But, let's be real. Kamala Harris was campaigning from churches there was video of that, and I'm like,
sure.
Look at this. Look at what she's doing. And yet we got people hiding.
Sure.
Your thoughts? You were one that didn't hide.
Well, no, and I won't hide. And here's the thing, Kamala, the reason why she did that, it only works when, it's on their side. Otherwise, if it's anyone who's calling out the truth, calling out decency, morals, trying to protect children, right, whether they be in the womb or out of the womb, and the list goes on and on and on, you're in violation. I pay no attention to that stuff. Acts 4, they came against the rulers, the political figures, against the apostles, told them, shut up, we threaten you, be quiet. Hey, that was the Johnson Amendment, rights from the pit of hell. And the apostles said, hey, we would rather obey God than man. We're not going to be quiet. In fact, God grant us more boldness. And that's where the pastors of our country missed it, is you have a moral and a spiritual and a high calling from God to speak truth, especially in times of darkness, insanity, and that which is touching children. You have to speak up. It is your God-given calling. And so this needs to get thrown out immediately. And Pastor, Gene, let me just say this as a pastor. The part that is so frustrating is I talk to pastors all the time, and they would say, oh, the Johnson Amendment. I said, pay no attention to it. You don't understand. You are affecting not only the culture, but there are 40 million equipped to know what is going on, and they're not given that impartation of boldness to go out and be a voice and make a difference. So I think this needs to be one of the top priorities on President Trump's list, and thank you for bringing it up, and let's push this thing forward.
Yeah, he said, when I asked him, he said he'd do it day one. We'll see. Well, let's get the executive order started. But I agree with what Mark is saying.
Christmas coming up. We've even got Thanksgiving. That is a prophetic book. I went and picked it back up because I started reading it, before the election. Here, you asked a question at the beginning of this. Where do we go from here? It is in the second half of that book. And I want to encourage people, if you want to know what God is saying, you need to get that book. I literally couldn't put it down. So I highly, highly recommend that, Killing America. Very well done. You and your wife, Gene. So great book.
Yeah, so get your copy. It's right there on the screen, killingamericabook.com. Or you can call the number. Now, as we enter in the holiday season, we want to give you a free book. This is not a download. This is a book we're going to actually ship to you. Who is the troublemaker? Why is it that you need to know why is all of this going on in America, and understand who the troublemaker really is? You can scan that QR code, put your information in there, or of course you can call the phone number and 877-281-6297, and we will ship this book absolutely free to you, and it's a great book for you to share with your family and friends as well. Shipping's included. So there is, when I say free, it really is free until December 1st. So until December 1st, get your copy of the book, and let's see things happen. All right. Let's go to Stephen Miller, and I want you to hear what he had to say about Liberation Day. Watch.
The moment that President Trump puts his hand on that Bible and takes the oath of office, as he has said, the occupation ends, Liberation Day begins. He will immediately sign executive orders, sealing the border shut, beginning the largest deportation operation in American history, finding the criminal gangs, rapists, drug dealers, and monsters that have murdered our citizens and sending them home. No one will be allowed to enter the country illegally, and ICE will be empowered in partnership with FBI, DEA, ATF, the National Guard, to fully seal and secure the border with CBP and to find and identify the criminal threats that are inside this country and send them back home. We saw that heartbreaking testimony, Sean. Laken Riley, that precious, beautiful young woman, fought for her life against an illegal alien imported by Biden-Harris for 18 harrowing minutes. She fought for her life. And we are going to honor that extraordinary woman. And we're going to honor every victim who has suffered. Under President Trump's leadership, we're going to honor that suffering by unleashing a righteous wave of justice and sending these criminal migrants back home.
All right, Stephen Miller, of course, he's been named Deputy Chief of Staff. Let me go to you, Mark, first. Sounds very bold and strong. Do you think they're really going to be able to push through and do this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, they have the American people on their side on this one. The American people are unified. They're tired of the open border. I think that border is going to slam shut. I think you're going to hear the doors all the way across the country. I think a lot of people are going to self-deport because they don't want to be involved in this. I think you're going to see pressure all over the country in that regard. When you get all these agencies now cooperating with each other, and the agencies have wanted to, by the way, most law enforcement want to get rid of the illegal immigrants. I think you're going to see that happen all over the country almost immediately. And if there's one guy who carries the passion on this issue, who absolutely knows it inside and out, is Stephen Miller. That was a great appointment. I think it's the perfect place for him, and I think it's going to get done, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I can tell. All right, let me go to you, Josh Phillip, on the border. This is obviously, you might as well get ready. We're going to hear reports from the other side about, we're being so cruel and mean and all this stuff you will hear. But what Mark just said, the American people have spoken, and they said this is very important. Your thoughts?
Well, I found it very telling that the Democrats on the campaign trail, when, again, Republicans were saying that Kamala Harris was the border czar, their response to that wasn't to say, she handled it how we wanted it handled. The response to that was to say that, Biden secured the border. It was to say that, no, she was not the border czar. I think they've realized that this policy is not as politically divisive as they may have thought it would be. And that's also why I think Trump was using it as his number one policy. It's why he made a point of just repeating it every time he debated, is because he knows that this actually has more support among Americans than maybe many believed it would have. And again, I go back and say this used to not be that divisive of an issue. If you go back to Obama, Bill Clinton, deportations were normal. And again, Obama deported at his time more than any president before him. This was not a politically divisive issue.
And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. All right, let me show you this. Donald Trump Jr.'s, his show's Triggered, his podcast. He had Tom Homan on, and he talked about what is he going to do on that first day. Watch.
But what's your overarching message to Americans who are eager for major border action on minute one? Like Inauguration Day, 1 second in. How much will you be able to improve the life of everyday Americans?
I got 3 words for him. Shock and awe. Shock and awe.
I love it.
You're going to see us take this country back. And look, like I said before, it isn't just about the deportation operation. It isn't just about saving the children. It ain't about securing the border. What's the result? Less overdose deaths, less sex trafficking. For God's sakes, one of the worst crimes around. Less migrants dying. Under this administration, over 4,000 aliens have died crossing that border, an historic record. When President Trump, again, had immigration on 90%, had that border shut down, he saved thousands of lives. So less aliens die, less Americans die. Wages will increase because you don't have all that illegal labor working for pennies on a dollar up here. Sex trafficking is going to vastly increase. This country is going to be alien crime. Alien crime, you're going to see that reduced significantly. As far as Trenda, Agua, and MS-13, and notice to you, my gang's bigger than your gang, and we're going to take you out too.
Okay, Pastor Hank, you heard him there. My gang is bigger than your gang. I mean, you can't get a stronger guy than Tom Homan when it comes to the border. What did you think?
Well, that guy's a dude, man. You don't mess around with him. And I like the fact that, he's going to be heading up so many important areas of our country because, listen, it's over. It's over for these people that think the American people did not let their voice, their desire, be heard. And for so long, we were ignored. They brought harshness on us through all the dumb COVID mandates. Refreshing to see strong leadership. And, Gene, it's why they're fearing Trump's cabinet. They know these people are serious and they're dangerous to the leftist agenda. You're going to see a lot of great changes because remember what God has been saying for 4 years with you on this program. That's right. We are in the middle of a great reset, removals and reversals, and it's going to play out in a tremendous way for God and for the people.
Amen. And the left thought they were the reset. We're the reset.
Yep.
All right, Rick, you hear that, and you heard Mark brought up a good point. I had thought about the self-deportations. I mean, we really could see that. That would make a lot of sense. What do you think?
I think it definitely will. Listen, you watch that Homan clip, you watch the Miller clip, and you go, I mean, it's just Christmas every day right now with all of these appointments. It's absolutely incredible, and he's picking the right people to get the job done. And back to what we started the program with, the whole unity thing. I mean, this one, no doubt, every sane person in the country, when they watch those two clips, they go, yes, please, amen, hallelujah, it's about time we've had that kind of sanity. I mean, the average person with any common sense whatsoever knows if your home is in the city, or especially if it's in a crime-ridden area, if you just leave all the doors open, all the windows open, all day, every day, all night, you know that your home is now going to become a place that anybody can take advantage of, that the criminals are going to absolutely flock to. And that's what we've done as a nation. So everybody with common sense is going, yes, close the windows, close the door. Doesn't mean you can't have somebody over to dinner. Doesn't mean you can't have company, but you get to know who's coming in, and they only come in when you invite them. That's all we're talking about doing here. And Tom Homan's, he summarized it so much. It's going to save lives of illegal aliens. It's going to save lives of Americans, most importantly, because that's their job. It's just the right thing to do. And for 3.5 years, we've had to deal with the wrong thing. And most Americans know. So I think this one will absolutely unify the country.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good to watch. But not everybody's on board. In fact, let's go to Arizona and see what Katie Hobbs had to say.
What would worry you the most, Governor, about mass deportations?
Well, I think the diversion of law enforcement from the work that they do every day to keep our communities safe. People hiding in fear. We saw that under previous state policies here. And it harms communities. It tears families apart. And that's not gonna happen on my watch.
I don't even know what she said, Rick.
Gene, I meant to say, even blue state governors and mayors, they're going to say things like what she just said on television, but they're lying. They want this too. Are you kidding me? Yeah. They've watched their own communities be completely taken over. Their liberal constituencies have been showing up at the city councils and everything else going, stop the insanity. You have to stop this illegal immigration. So even the blue cities, I think, deep down, those mayors and governors, they're with us. They want this to happen, but they're going to rant and rave or give a word salad. That was Kamala Light right there, I think.
Josh, Philip.
Hey, Gene, can I add something here?
Go ahead.
I think this is really important. What we're about to witness is the greatest internal humanitarian effort that the United States has ever seen. And we couch this, and I don't like this. It's like they're calling it this huge deportation. This is not about deportation. This is about rescuing our inner cities from crime. This is about rescuing our border communities from crime. This is about stopping the sex trafficking of little girls. This is about stopping the fentanyl deaths of over 100,000 people a year in this country. This is about restoring the ability of our schools to handle the influx of American citizen children. This is about rescuing our hospital system from illegal immigrants. They can now serve the people in their communities. Literally the single greatest internal humanitarian effort that the United States of America has ever seen. It is a bright day in the country.
It is a bright day. It's almost Josh Phillip, it's almost like America's at a crossroads. See what I did there? Crossroads.
Yeah. Well, you know what's going to end up happening? If you have sanctuary cities and they say, hey, come here and we won't deport you, what's going to happen? Every illegal immigrant who does not want to get deported is going to go to those few key areas. And then what's going to happen? This is going to be January and December in the dead of winter. I don't know if they're going to be going to Chicago. Maybe they'll go to Arizona. But these states then, or these cities, whatever it is, they're going to be having to deal with everybody who doesn't want to get deported. They're going to have to care for them. They're going to have to house them. They're going to have to feed them. And that's going to, I think, cause crime. It's going to cause a lot of unhappiness within the, again, with the local communities who have to deal with that. If you want to talk about benefiting communities. And then in addition to that, you're going to have a lot of people very unhappy because they feel they're not getting enough. The states and the cities will have to use their own budgets to pay for that. They're not going to get federal money, I guarantee it, under Trump. And so this is going to create a crisis, ironically, in the very cities trying to protect this. And I think it'll have the opposite result.
Well, it's going to be fun to watch, that's for sure. Let's go back in time and talk about Texas, because I just want to talk about Texas. They made some decisions and kind of affected everybody. Watch Governor Abbott, what he had to say.
Know this, and that is what we did. We found the right way, the legal way, that we were going to be able to move the migrants that Biden dropped off into our neighborhoods in South Texas and move them to sanctuary cities like in New York City or Washington, D.C. or Chicago across the United States. And what was at one time a Texas problem turned out to be a problem for the entire United States of America. And that compelled Americans to get up in arms and angry about what Biden and Harris had done and make sure that we elected a president who was going to solve it.
Yeah, I think it actually made a huge difference. People talk about it was a political stunt, and indeed it was a political stunt because literally the numbers weren't enough to actually make a difference here in Texas. And we also had DeSantis doing this out of Florida. But what it did is it drew attention away from Texas and to places like Martha's Vineyard and other blue cities. And when it was in their backyard, when it was on their front porches, when it was affecting their crime and the vagrancy rates in their cities, they didn't like it so much anymore. And I think it was one of the most effective political stunts in modern American history. I love it, and I hope we continue to play the game that way.
Well, and let me show you what Texas has done. Wait a minute, Rick. Let me show you what Trump did,
okay.
or what we're offering. Texas is offering the incoming Trump administration a tract of land, more than 1,400 acres, on which to stage mass deportation operation. Texas is following suit, like, hey, we're going to help. We send them there, we'll help get rid of them. All right, Rick, your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that, Gene, because I think that's going to be a real important piece of how to do this logistically. And Mark mentioned it, but I just wanted to point out it was Ron DeSantis that started that whole thing. He didn't just participate. It was his idea. And thankfully, Greg Abbott grabbed a hold of it and used it. So credit to all of them for being a part of that. But then the opposite of that started happening. Actually, the federal government started flying them into cities across this country. And even Laken Riley's murderer was allowed to fly to Georgia from, I believe it was New York, on our dime. Taxpayers paid for that. That just came out in the trial a few days ago. So it's been an absolute debacle on the Biden administration's part, really a concentrated effort to destroy our country and to bring us down to the lowest common denominator because these people hate America and they want us to be equal to third world countries. But all of that's ending very, very soon. And so anyway, I think Greg Abbott has done well on this issue over the last 15 to 18 months. Could have done better in the beginning, but we're not going to go there. But this whole thing about the 1,400 acres, Gene, people aren't going to like that either. It's going to look like a refugee camp for a while. And so I think Mark's reframing of this is right on. This is a humanitarian effort. We're trying to help people, and we're actually trying to make people healthier, save lives, all of that across the country, but also these illegal aliens as well.
Let me go to you, Pastor Hank. I mean, this is, and we're going to get into the Christian vote, but I want to give you an opportunity.
Amazing commentary just a minute ago. You ought to run for office. But he's right. We need to look at this from the standpoint of a humanitarian effort and really crisis. I mean, it was brilliant what you said. And I think we have to remember, Gene, I've said for these last 4 years that these borders have been open. If you look at the word border, you find something that has been void. Order. And Jesus is the wisest one that has ever walked this planet. And he said, wide or open is the way that leads to destruction. And you look at what has happened with these open borders, and it's time to restore order. We need to look at it from the humanitarian crisis and efforts to really restore order back for the sake of the people and what will make our nation great again. And I also want to say, too, to Rick's point, I think the Trump administration and his cabinet need to be very smart if they're going to consider that 1,400 acres, how they label it and how that's presented to the American people.
Oh, I'm sure, absolutely. There has to be thought through. Oh, I'm going to go to Tom Homan again because I like him. And he had this message to say to elected.
There is a speed bump on the front. This is a child-protected area. Slow down less than 30 kilometers. There is a speed bump on the front.